in the last section, we started to render our list of days by creating a days helper function here. So we now need to iterate over all of our days and create a different day item function, or excuse me, different day item component for each one of those. So to do our iteration for us, we're going to make use of a native JavaScript function called map. Map works like so. We call map on an array and pass it a function. That function will then be called one time for each element of the array. Whatever we return from that function will create a new array. So that's basically the textbook definition of a map. I don't know about you, but that never made much sense to me when I was first reading about it. So let's just go ahead and see how it works in practice. So I'm going to take our days array, right? And we will call map on it. We call map with a function, and map will be called, or excuse me, this inner function will be called one time for every element of the array that we're calling it on. So in our case, 7 times for 7 days of the week. The input to this function will be the element of the array for that particular iteration. So we'll call it with, or we'll add the argument day right here. And we'll put a comment in here and we'll say called 7 times, 1 for each day of the week. So the first time that it gets called, it'll be Sunday, next time Monday, next time Tuesday, so on and so on. The second part of the equation here is that whatever we return from this function will create a new array. So we can kind of imagine that it's going to return an array which we'll just call days for right now. And down here we'll say days will be an array of day item components, 1 for each day of the week. So only one thing left, and that is to create our instances of day item. It's going to be probably more straightforward than you might guess. All we have to do is return day item, and the day that we use will be the day for this particular loop of our map. So we now have our list of days components. The final result is going to be something that looks like, I'm going to add another comment in here, day item, where day is equal to Sunday, then another day item where day is equal to Monday, and so on and so on. That's the end result here. It's an array of day item components. So we've got a whole bunch of extra syntax in here that we don't really need. I'm going to go ahead and simplify this function just a little bit. First off, I'm going to delete these comments. And rather than assigning the result of the map to days, we're just going to return the result directly. So in the end, what we're returning here is just an array of day item components. All right, one last thing. We need to go ahead and actually call this days array and make sure that the result of it ends up inside of our render function. So let's delete the existing call to day item, and we're going to again make reference to a JavaScript variable in our JSX, which means we need to add our curly braces. Next, we'll call this .days, and I'm going to go ahead and save it. So let's go ahead and see if this works. We'll refresh, and sure enough, we get one day item for each day of the week. Fantastic. Let's review what happened one more time, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the idiosyncrasies of this approach here. We didn't want to just call one instance of day item and pass it an individual day, because that would be just very repetitious code, and who knows, maybe we want to someday reuse this code in here for not days, but instead months of the year. So instead of calling day item 7 times directly in our render function, we decided to render our list inside of a helper function called days. Inside of days, we mapped over the array. The map returned one day item component for every day of the week, so 7 day items in total. The array that was returned from map was then returned from the function. We then called this.days inside of our render function. So the end result here is something that looks like an array of day item components. React is very intelligent about rendering an array. If we have an array that we're trying to render, and so long as every element inside that array is a React component, it will render it as a list, as we see here. There's one thing that I want to point out here. When using React Native, this method of building items, where we just kind of iterate over it, should be only used whenever the quantity of items is known to be very short. Okay, so in our case, we always know that, of course, there's 7 days of the week. If days of the week, though, was a different array, and let's say it was like 1,000 items long, that's where we would definitely not be using this approach here. And let me show you why. If we were writing just vanilla React.js for the browser, if we rendered a ton of content, right, like 1,000 items, that's all being rendered inside of a browser window. And that browser window definitely knows how to scroll through all that content. Well, that is not the case with React Native. There's no built-in scrolling with React Native. We have to be very explicit whenever we want that scrolling to happen. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and just build many days of the week lists here, right? So I'm going to expect to see days of the week about 7 times, it looks like. So I'm going to save this and refresh. And okay, so my content is running off the page here, but no matter if I scroll up and down doing a 2-finger swipe or a 3-finger swipe, there's no scrolling going on here. I don't get any scroll by default. So let's go ahead and clean up the code and go back to just 1 day of the week list. Cool. So again, the idea here is that if we know that our list of items is going to be relatively compact, doing this style of iteration is a-okay, no problem. But if we ever expect the list to be very long, we need to do a slightly different method of creating a list, which we'll cover in a future section. So let's continue on to the next section.